All hail the conquering hero. All hail the world leader who works tirelessly to bring peace to the planet. All hail Vladmir Putin. The bare-chested dictator is now talking peace in Syria. Maybe America is doing the right thing, letting him flame on and then flame out. Another day, another series of polls giving almost every Republican candidate hope of being the nominee. This as President Obama and plenty of people are on the right and ridiculing, getting tired of the diaper changing over debates. Take a school system in the Northeast, one that desperately needs money and reform. Throw lots of cash at it, and what happens? Still a nightmare, and yet another example of how our schools are turning out semi-functional literates. And we need to take a moment and note the societal improvements afforded us by tigers, and why we need to consider a new diet for our furry friends. Keep in mind this slice of advice: alcohol and petting zoos do not mix. I'm Ed Berliner. This is The Hardline for Tuesday, November 3rd, 2015.
Why do you oppose Russia inviting Syrian opposition figures to a meeting in Moscow, in Russia? Why?
We think it's premature. We think that there's a lot of work that is done. We thought there was a good start in Vienna. The stakeholders came around the table, including Russia.
We are either in the beginning stages of one of the largest and perhaps most costly Middle Eastern blunders in recent memory, or we're watching as one of the more duplicitous dictators in the world becomes mired in the Middle Eastern muck and will eventually be forced to bow his head and take his medicine. How about a third choice? The one that has Vladimir Putin actually doing something constructive in Syria and helping the West get rid of one problem, leaving, of course, plenty more behind. The maze of possibilities are endless, fascinating, and could be dire for the region. So let's get some answers. She is reporter for the International Business Times, working the European beat for the breaking news team, bringing up some interesting points about the bare-chested dictator, Jess McHugh. He is senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and has covered Middle Eastern issues for numerous publications, including the National Review Online. Dr. Emanuele Ottolenghi, I want to thank you both for joining us. Let's go ahead and dig right in because I want to get to you first, Jess. In your most recent column, you talked about the fact that the crash of the Russian airliner may spur more support for Putin's campaign in Syria. And also you said that under no circumstances must it appear that this was a technical fault, quoting someone there, that this would reflect Russian incompetence. Is it just possible that in the mind of Vladimir Putin, he actually hopes that this crash of this Russian airliner might be an attack against his homeland because it politically might help him?
Well, it's good to be here, first of all. And I think it's certainly possible. As I mentioned, I was studying Martin Macaulay there, who is a longtime historian in the region. And what he said to me was basically the worst case scenario would be for this to be some kind of a technical failure, because that would, as he said, quote unquote, reflect Russian incompetence. On the other hand, if it turns out that it is a terror attack, or if also equally importantly, the Russian media decides that it was, then this, I think, could really spur more support for his campaign in Syria, because Russians will begin to think of the threat in ISIS as a threat that could come to Russia at any time.
Is it fair to say, now, Doctor, let me come to you on this, that in some ways Putin would like to see this? He would like to see the Islamic State come at him. He would like to see it because it just might help him somewhere down the road. That's a terrible thing to say, but it might be possible.
You know, it might be possible if Vladimir Putin depended on public opinion to make decisions, and if his policies could be influenced one way or another by public opinion. I am not a Russia expert, but Russia doesn't strike me as a place where the mood swings of the public are taken in high consideration by the legitimately democratically elected representatives of the public. Let's not forget, this is an authoritarian state. Public opinion can be manipulated, has been manipulated in the past. And I do not think that this is going to be an exception, whichever way the investigation about the causes of the crash end up going.
Jess, we came in here with a soundbite that talked about whether or not Assad and the opposition should be part of the peace talks here. The United Nations is now saying that, yes, they should. Would that be a victory for Vladimir Putin if they bring them in?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, for a long time, Vladimir Putin was an outspoken supporter of Assad and really one of the last supporters of Assad. And he has been the one often saying Assad is the only person fighting ISIS in Syria. Assad needs to be part of the peace process. But then again, we saw today him saying he might not be crucial to the peace process. I think really Putin is concerned with Russia's objectives in Syria, and those might not necessarily be Assad's objectives.
Let's look at this from another perspective here. And Dr. Ottolenghi, let me come to you here, because now we are talking about, and there are some people around the world who are looking at Putin as doing a good thing here, that maybe he is the guy who actually can bring peace to Syria. Wait a minute now. This is still backing a bloodthirsty regime here that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, so how can anybody get it so wrong here? It's not as if he's all of a sudden going to be the great savior.
You know, the heinous deeds of the Assad regime have a huge role to play in the blame game about the rise of ISIL. Assad and his atrocities facilitated both the radicalization on the ground and the vacuum created by the civil war that was filled in by the Islamic State. Now, Assad has been supported by the Russians alongside Iran for 4.5 years. The reason why Russia intervenes now is not because all of a sudden it wants to contain ISIL. It's because the level of support that both Iran and Russia gave to Assad for 4.5 years was not enough to help the Assad regime quash the uprising and defeat all of the rebel groups. Russia has gone into Syria now much more actively with a military presence, boots on the ground, air force and all, because it is there to preserve its national interest, chiefly its access to Tartus and the East Mediterranean coast. And therefore it has to enable its proxy, the Assad regime, to maintain control over that territory. Putin is using the Islamic State and claims to be fighting the Islamic State in order to gain legitimacy, credibility in the West and in the court of international public opinion. But his real aim and objective is to protect and consolidate control over those chunks of territory that are vital to Russian interests, not fight ISIL.
So, Jess, from a reporter's standpoint here, let's be very frank. President Obama's seeking his bid, if you will, to exert more influence in Syria in the civil war just might be too little and just might be too late. Now you have the Kurds getting increased support from Russia, and they're about to open an office in Moscow. Are there really people in Europe, or at least that you've been able to glean, who see Putin as a savior, see what he's doing as a good thing in any sense?
Well, it really depends on who you ask. I mean, certainly in Russia, he continues to enjoy a lot of support. In Western Europe, it varies greatly country to country. I would say, to kind of add on to what is Russia's endgame, I think that there's two things going on. One is that Russia might not necessarily be concerned with all of these humanitarian crises or with Assad's past. I think, one, they really want a seat at this geopolitical table and they want to be a major actor in the Middle East. And second, I do think that there is this concern of a domestic terror threat. They may not be just targeting ISIS or ISIL, but there is this real concern. There's been over 2,000 Russian fighters who have left to go fight in Syria, and I think Putin is afraid that if the war in Syria comes to an end, that they're going to come back and fight that war in the Caucasus.
I got about 90 seconds left, so just let me stay with you for a quick answer on this right now. We have in Germany, there is unrest right now because of the refugee crisis that is now flooding in. They're talking about anarchy in many ways there. And there are some who believe that it is Putin's gamble here caused that flood of refugees. And that may help the West to buckle there because he's still trying to fight the sanctions. Do you put any salt in that whatsoever? Have you heard any of that in your reporting, talking to people?
Not so much, to be honest, and I've really focused a lot of my reporting at International Business Times on the refugee crisis. I don't think that we can say Putin's actions have been causal in the refugee crisis. It's really more a conflation of regional elements, including the ongoing and escalating civil war, including recruitment from ISIS, and all of these factors have combined to make it such that people are just fleeing by the hundreds of thousands.
Dr. Ottolenghi, about 30 seconds to you then. Let me just get your perspective on this. Do you think that this is perhaps not anything that he planned, but certainly if the refugee crisis continues to Putin, it's a benefit if he pushes more pressure on the West and just puts them in more difficulty every day.
You know, it all comes down to how the Europeans are going to explain and what cause they're going to attribute to the refugee crisis. There's a significant number of people in Europe who say it is because of the Islamic State, their barbarism and their atrocities. Less so people who recognize that the refugee crisis is largely a byproduct of the brutality of Assad's regime and his proxies. I think that the only way to solve the refugee crisis is to solve the civil war and restore stability inside the country so that people can go home.
Which is what Vladimir Putin seems to think that he is the guy to do at this point, and of course, much to the chagrin of President Obama and the United States and others. Jess McHugh, Dr. Emanuele Ottolenghi, I want to thank you both for joining us. I hope we do it again soon. The reality of Turkey, the country that remains in the tight grip of a government that wants no freedom for its own people. We'll talk with a journalist who fears for her life next on The Hardline.